Thank you for joining us for this month's Gems of the Past, sponsored by the Tennessee Overhill and Tennessee 250. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, local author and historian Joe Guy, who will be speaking to us about the Battle of Athens.
Thank you all. We've got a great crowd. Can everybody hear me? Okay. If you can't, just let me know. I'll use the microphone, but I don't really want to throw that thing around much if I don't have to. So this is, in my humble opinion, probably the most significant historical event that has ever occurred in our county. And it has a lot of implications that you and I actually enjoy today. But it's a fantastic story, and it's one that I enjoy talking about. So we'll just jump right in. So we are quick sometimes to talk about what happened on August 1st, 1946. But actually, things like that just don't come about on their own. When you really study this and look at how kind of the forces and the systems that came together and kind of at this watershed moment, I like to go all the way back to the Civil War, or post-Civil War, Tennessee and McMinn County. So after the Civil War, as you know, Lincoln had already developed a Reconstruction plan prior to his assassination to bring all of the southern states back into the Union. When he died, that was taken over by some of his administrators that were going to extend a whole lot less grace than Lincoln was, and it was sort of a tough time for some of the southern states. You may know that Tennessee, of course, was the first state to come back into the Union after the Civil War. So this was a largely Republican-driven program. And we all know, no matter what your political affiliation is, whoever's in charge gets to make the decisions, and they make the appointments. And so under the Republican administration that was overseeing Reconstruction, those cherry jobs to oversee the administration of Reconstruction went to Republicans. That's just the way it is. And as time went on, and as states came back into the Union, the Republicans who happened to be in those positions, they kind of liked those jobs. And they wanted to keep those jobs because there's, for example, the postmaster, oddly enough, was one of the most sought after political appointments that you could get. I really don't know why. I'm not delved into that really deeply, but I'm curious. One of these days I'm going to kind of research that. I assume that it's because the postmaster had connections to Washington, as well as he was sort of controlling, we didn't have telephones and things back there early on. He was basically controlling a lot of the commerce and communication, and maybe that was part of it. But posts like that were appointed by the government were very much well sought after. And people did not give those up when people were in power. It's very similar to the way it is today. We don't like to give up where we are. So, a couple of other things came into play. Not only was there this desire to hold these offices and these appointed offices, but Tennessee sort of had an antiquated constitution. Our constitution had been written during our state's founding, and it allowed a lot of things that you could allow in a frontier environment. But when you get into the late 19th century, especially into the early 20th century, commerce had grown and wealth had grown and highways were there and utilities were everywhere. And so our Constitution left some gaps. For example, under that Constitution, you could hold more than one elected office. A single person could. Tyler Boyd does a great presentation, and I didn't know this. If you were here for his presentation last year, there was actually some legislation in Tennessee that would allow a political person, specifically the sheriff, to go into another county and basically take that county over. So those little things were in our system that maybe at some point early on were useful when you didn't have a whole lot of people that were literate, maybe not a whole lot of people to choose from to hold offices. But into the late 1900s, late 1800s and early 1900s, that became an issue when power and wealth were there, and people would use those antiquated rules and laws to maintain power. Also, the office of sheriff was a little bit outdated. For example, the sheriff was a fee. I'm still a fee office on paper, just like the court clerk and two or three others are the register of deeds. They're fee offices. They generate their revenue for the operation of their office through charging fees when you come in for services. And some of those do their own payroll within the office. I don't do that because of this. It's not about the payroll, it's about the fees, because a sheriff, for example, living back, say, in the 1850s or 60s, because we have records that show this, I could arrest you, put you in, even on a trumped up charge, put you in jail, give you a cup of coffee while you're in jail, and legally charge you for a meal. Yeah. And so I could charge you a lot of fees and things like that. And also, the sheriff early on took delinquent taxes in. Yeah. No wonder some of our early sheriffs left office very wealthy on big farms that they went back to. And so there's all these things sort of came together in the late 1800s because of Reconstruction and the political machinery that developed. And that's kind of what we refer to as political machinery. And I'll talk about that as we go through this. That kind of came to fruition under the fallout, so to speak, from Reconstruction, where Republicans kind of wanted to stay in office. And so if it was legal for me to stay in, or to hold 2 or 3 different offices, then I might get my buddy to be a member of the county court. Now I'll mention the county court too in just a minute. But I might also get him to be appointed the administrator of elections. So you can see how that would help out. Now again, in a frontier environment, maybe that would work. Obviously it would work. But human beings, we figured out ways that we can manipulate that system to our own advantage. So county court, that was another antiquated form of local government. Living today in the 21st century, most people have no idea that we have not always had a county commission and county mayor form of government. It is because of this event that we have that. And I'll explain as we get closer to the end why. What we had was a system called county court. And you may, some of you that may have a little more experience, might remember county court. Because it did last until the early 1980s, and there was ultimately a rewrite of our Constitution. How county court worked was like this. Again, it was sort of a frontier-based form of government that we actually got from North Carolina's Constitution by virtue of it being an English colony, getting it kind of from European models. So they would form a county, and very early on, we had militias here in all of our frontier counties, and so men would get together, and out of that body of men, they would be they were sort of like the National Guard back then. The local militia they would drill 4 or 5 times a year. Out of that group of men, they would elect a militia captain. Well, by virtue of that election, he was then placed as a member of the county court. And I think in McMinn County, we had 15 civil districts back then. And there were 2 captains of militia out of each district, so about 30 men made up the county court. Later on, after militias kind of went away, we had an office that most of you have heard of, the Justice of the Peace. And so if you were elected as a Justice of the Peace, the 2 were elected in each civil district, so there'd be about 30 of them. That made up the county court. And going into the 1940s, that's what we had throughout about half of the 20th century. That was the county court. And out of that body, they would elect one to be the county judge. Now, here's the problem. We all grow up and we take civics, and we know the importance of separation of power in government. It is how our nation was founded. It's how our Constitution is written. But imagine, if you will, a local government model that has your legislative branch, your judicial branch, and your executive branch, and it's all the same people. Yeah, exactly. Again, worked great. While we're a frontier, primitive county, a very agrarian county, but as we get into the late 19th century, early 20th century, wealth starts to prosper, commerce grows, that becomes a vehicle by which people can manipulate that. And the Republicans were doing it. I like to say it this way, and I'm a Republican, but Republicans came up with this stuff. Okay? We came up with this as far as it goes with the Battle of Athens. So, you gotta get on into, let me see if so you get on up into 1929. We have the Great Depression starts, the stock market crashes. You get a Democrat that's elected president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He does the same thing that all presidents do. He appointed Democrats to oversee his New Deal programs. That's just what we do in this country. So, they didn't, and that's the thing, and I'm explaining some things to you because these things get twisted around. Just because there happen to be Democrats in office, when this happens, sometimes people beat their chest and go, oh, Democrats, well, all they did was take the model that the Republicans came up with and used it. Okay? And so they just call it, in a sense, the Democrats that were in power when this happens, they just kind of get called holding the bag. Because it's the same, they were doing the same things that Republican administrators and elected officials have been doing for many, many years. It was just the way it was. And to be honest about it, it always wasn't a bad thing, depending on who was in office. There were audits done back then, specifically of our county. So we're debt-free. I think a lot of y'all know that. We're one of the very few debt-free counties in the nation, which is remarkable. That's not the first time we've been debt-free. We were debt-free under those political machines at different times. And so sometimes if you had good and decent men in those offices, with all the power that they had, they used it very wisely, very graciously, and were actually pretty good administrators. But not always did that happen. And that's sometimes when problems happen. So I just want to kind of give you a little background, what all led up to this. So, going to World War II, you've got young men across the country, specifically from McMinn County, who go to Germany, they go to Europe, and they go to the Pacific. And like young men will be, many were volunteering, they were idealistic, they were fighting for the principles of freedom against the Axis powers. There was a lot of pride and patriotism that they were standing on and fighting for. But some men from McMinn County started getting letters from back home because the sheriff who was in charge at the time, who was in office at the time, saying, well, your daddy voted the wrong way and their barn got burned. Or, well, your brother came home on leave and he had some, because when soldiers would come home on leave, they'd always give them a little extra money. And some of our less scrupulous law enforcement officers knew that. And so they would roll those GIs when they'd go out here to our bars that we had out in the county and have a few beers. They'd catch them and big whip them and take their money away from them, or fine them, overfine them. And hey, your brother, he got arrested by the deputies because he came home. And so there was some heavy-handedness that had been going on, and that bothered those young men. So when they come back, and they didn't matter if they were Republicans or Democrats, whatever it may be. That sort of solidified them that they didn't think that basically people were being treated well, and they also had some problems with the electoral process. So let's see. So that's kind of what you had. I know I'm trying to feed you with a water hose here because there's a lot to this. I don't want to oversimplify it because that's where we make mistakes. We oversimplify events like this. So you have these very young, idealistic men coming back as former GIs, wishing to, as young people will do, wanting to effect change. You had entrenched older men who were in office that because that's what we do when we get older. We like to do things the way we've always done it, and sometimes, like I said, it worked, and it worked great. Sometimes it didn't. But nevertheless, that's what you have. The two opposing sides were basically a younger, more idealistic group of men versus an older, more established group of men that had grown up under political machinery. So, and I'm going to get back to the specific people as we move through this, because that gets a little complicated too. So, this is, of course, when the event happened, August 1st, 1946. Throughout the spring and summer of 1946, a very hot political climate in McMinn County. You had the GIs got together, and they formed not a Republican Party, not a Socialist Party, not a Democrat Party, but what they called the GI Party. And it was a nonpartisan party of military veterans, and they challenged every city and county office across the board. And we'll see the candidates here in just a minute. So throughout the spring and summer, they were holding rallies. Of course, the Democrats that were in office at the time, they were holding their rallies. It was a very hot political environment, like I say, very passionate. It was gaining a lot of attention. Voting was an issue because, like I say, there were some antiquated laws that let people do some things that were legal to do. It probably wasn't the most ethical thing to do, but it allowed people to manipulate elections a little bit. And people sort of kind of gotten, they lost their faith, if you will, in the system. And we are reliving some of that sometimes today. But a lot of people just said kind of, it doesn't matter if you vote, there's so-and-so still in the election, so on and so forth, with this political machinery. And this kind of supposedly gave people hope. In fact, that was the motto, that was the slogan of the GI Party. It was not kick the Democrats out, it was not do this to so-and-so. It was every vote will be counted as cast. That was their motto. So obviously that was something that people could identify with. That was a big issue to people. And so when this day dawns, on August 1st, a lot of people came out to vote. And so we'll kind of get into kind of how that day went down as we go here. So here are two important men that were on the Democrat side. So let me explain. This is sometimes confusing to people. So Paul Cannon, his grandson's sitting right down here in front of me. And this Paul was just telling me that Mr. Cantrell, I knew he lived not too far off Tennessee Avenue. And so he just lived just a couple of blocks away. Do what?
Within a block.
Yeah, within a block or so. And Etowah, a descendant of a Revolutionary War patriot, which is buried out here at Williamsburg Cemetery. The Cantrells had gotten involved with early Etowah in business. They had, I think Mr. Cantrell and his brother had invested in Etowah Light. Is that correct?
Yes.
Basically the power company for Etowah, and I believe, I'm about 90% sure that Etowah had electric lighting in their homes before Athens did. And so this little town kind of jumped up off the railroad, and it caused, we're still, that's why we like to have these big football and basketball games. So the east side can kind of get in with the west side. But you had Athens, that was the old county seat, and you have this little town that's popped up over here on the railroad, and there's all this wealth, and there's commerce, and there's technology, and he was wise enough to get in on some of that. He also worked for the railroad, and while he was working at the railroad, he meets this guy, Pat Mansfield. So like a lot of people who have been in North Georgia, Pat had migrated up into Etowah to work on the railroad. And they got to know each other and developed a relationship, got to be friends. So eventually, in 1934, 36, he runs for sheriff. Now, he'd already been on the county court. He'd been involved in politics for a little bit, but he runs for sheriff and wins. And is sheriff for 3 or 4 terms, and then he runs for Senate. So keep that in mind. When the Battle of Athens takes place, He is actually a Tennessee state senator, okay? But he's running for sheriff again, okay? With me? I know, it's confusing. He is actually coming back to run for sheriff, and here's why. So after he runs for the state senate, for the next couple of terms, Pat Mansfield, it happens even today, sheriffs have somebody that they've worked with and has worked with them, and so when they move on, they help the next guy step up and run for sheriff, and that's what happened. So Pat Mansfield, it gets elected sheriff, and he runs for sheriff. Here's his deal though. Like I said, this is an Etowah native, grew up here, born and bred here. Knew everybody knew him, everybody knows her family. Pat Mansfield was not. He was someone from another state, from Cartersville, Georgia, and he was a very different person than Mr. Cantrell was. So who's the sheriff? He is the sheriff during World War II. That's the sheriff that those GIs were getting letters about. A very heavy-handed guy. He always puts me in the mind of a college football player. Just kind of a tough guy. But I've seen references to him that he was. You may have heard the term years ago, a black Irishman. That was Pat Mansfield. I've heard good things about him. I've heard bad things about him. But nevertheless, he's the sheriff, and he's a little heavy-handed in how he deals with people. He's the one that kind of causes people to begin to question the system, to be disappointed with the sheriff's office, be disappointed with county government in general. Mr. Cantrell is still, that's his support over here. That's his home county. And these things are going on, and he kind of sees that this is kind of, things are getting out of control. So he decides, I'm going to come back and run for sheriff again. And maybe straighten some things out. And if he wants to run for state senate, so be it. But I'm going to come back home and try to fix things back home. So that's the situation. As confusing as that is. He is the sheriff, but he's not running for sheriff during the Battle of Athens. He is the former sheriff, but he's a state senator coming back to run for sheriff. Everybody caught up with me? Okay. So, then we have, well, I've already told you about Pat. Here's your GI candidates. All of these guys were World War II veterans except for Charlie Pickett. And I think he was a World War I veteran. But they were all veterans, and they were the candidates of all of the constitutional offices in McMinn County. Knox Henry being the candidate for sheriff. So again, throughout the summer, it is a lot of political events, as politics get sometimes. So August 1st dawns. And a couple of things about August 1st. You all know how pleasant it is around here in August. And we live in the 21st century where we can come in and get into the air conditioning. They could not. So imagine standing in line on a hot August day, already very passionate and aggravated, no matter what side you're on, and it's hot as blazes, and everybody's temperatures are high, and everybody's anxiety's high. And so I've read several historians agree with that the temperature itself and the humidity of East Tennessee probably played a role in this, because it was very uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable physically, it was uncomfortable socially, because remember, all these guys know each other. I want to really make that point. All these guys know each other. They were intermarried. They were sometimes related. They worked together. Some of them went to church together. They just had different political views, and there was a division throughout our county. And so that day, so when you go vote, even today, and we just went through an election, when you went and voted, whether you voted early or voted on election day, you went through the process of voting, there were people there to help you vote. And if you'll notice, there were just people in there standing around. And that's how it works. We have an election commission, and the way the election commission is balanced out, there are both parties on there. And it's whoever has the majority, I think, in the House, if I remember this correctly, has the majority on the local election commission. So we hold them, Republicans hold the majority in the House in Tennessee. So there's more Republicans on the election commission than Democrats. But there's always both there. And I'll tell you something, just personally, being around this stuff and participating in this for so long now, I'm amazed and impressed with how well all of those folks work through our local elections. They really do a wonderful job to work together. And that's the way it should be. So the same thing was true then. You had people monitoring the election to make sure things were going the way they were supposed to be. But there were some things that also took place that had not been addressed legally, and so these things happened. So the sheriff put deputies, about 2 deputies, at every polling place for security. Okay? Let me tell you something. The sheriff doesn't have the right to do that. I do not have the right to do that just because I want to. There has to be a problem of public safety for me to put an officer in a polling place. But that's what Mansfield did. He put deputies throughout the county. And a lot of these deputies were not even local men. He had recruited a lot of deputies from political allies in different counties. And people in Athens and Etowah saw them coming in and getting off the trains at our depots. And these guys back then, let me paint this picture for you. They didn't wear uniforms. The professional standards of police didn't exist then, especially when it came to sheriff's offices. They just wore suits like everybody else did. But they'd show you that big gun when they walk out through town to let you know that's the lawman, and you hope that's who he was. But they noticed there were a lot of people getting off these trains that nobody had ever seen before. And they were these deputies that Mansfield brought in. So they had deputies in every polling place. And here's something else. We talked about the Battle of Athens. There was almost a Battle of Etowah right over here at Carnegie Library because the same thing happened. There just wasn't gunshots. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So there were deputies at every polling place throughout the county, specifically the ones in Athens. But the GIs also had placed poll watchers at every polling place. And there were at least, well, sometimes maybe there was a couple places there was only one, but mostly there were 2 at every polling place. They were armed with a whistle, and they were literally supposed to be whistleblowers. If they saw something going on with the political process, with the voting, they were literally supposed to blow the whistle and draw attention to the officials there and handle whatever issue there was. One of the things that was going on back then, and this is another antiquated law that was manipulated by both sides, was the poll tax. So back then, if you don't know what the poll tax was, it was a way, and it dated way, way back. It was a way to control the black vote and the poor white vote. In essence, if your father had not owned property, was not a property owner, you had to pay a tax to be able to vote. Okay? And you would go and you would pay your tax, and they would give you a poll receipt, and that's what you brought to the polling place to show that you had paid your poll tax. And all black people basically had to do that. And you can see how that you could control people by making them pay for their right to vote. It's insane. I still to this day cannot wrap my head around how anything like that could ever happen, but that's just, it was accepted back then. So that was manipulated sometimes because guys in political parties and political power would go to the election commission and buy a bunch of poll receipts. Then they take them out into the poor white communities or poor black communities and give them out. I've already paid your poll tax for you, vote for so-and-so. And so you can kind of see how that further manipulated people. Of course, we know they gave out liquor and everything else to get people to vote, but they would use the poll tax, those poll tax receipts for that as well. So if the day rocks on, it gets very hot. Athens, all of the polling places are seeing this big turnout. The deputies that have been appointed to watch those polling places, especially those that were local, see people coming in that they know don't like them and are they're probably voting against them. So their anxiety is rising. The GIs are there, and they're sensing all this going on. All these people are coming in to vote. Well, in this particular case, we're going to focus on one particular voting precinct where some of these things happen. So, in Athens, coming up on the courthouse, up Jackson Street, on the right, the building is still there, was precinct number 11, and it was the Athens Water Works. Okay, it was sort of the precursor to the Athens Utilities Board. It's where you went to pay water bill. And that was a polling place. And so people were coming in and out of the polling place. It wasn't the only one. There was one at the courthouse. There was one over on White Street at the Dixie Cafe, and throughout the county, there's one over here at the Carnegie Library. In every community, those polling places were there just like they are today. But this one is going to be where some things go down. So at the Athens Water Works, about 3 p.m., a black gentleman comes from his home up in the Free Hill community. That's about where the Athens fire station is today, the YMCA. Tom Gillespie walks down, and he gets in line to vote there at precinct number 11. Now, Tom was a very well-liked man by both black folks and white folks. He was sort of a little entrepreneur. I don't know why this was in vogue back then, but for some reason it was a big deal for people to learn how to make street tamales in the 40s. And so Tom learned how to make street tamales, and this was just one of his little businesses he had. And he had a little cart and a little pony, and he would lead the pony downtown every day, and out of that cart he would sell people these homemade tamales. And that's, like I said, that's just one little business that he had. So he knew everybody. Everybody knew Tom. Tom had went and paid his poll tax, and so he's standing there in line, ready to go vote. But inside is a deputy named Wendy Wise. Wendy was about yay tall, and they called him Wendy because he didn't know how to keep his mouth shut. And Wendy is seeing all of these people coming in, and he knows is voting against his boss. He's hot. He's aggravated. He's already not a fine Christian man. And then he sees a black man coming in the door to vote. Well, the racist side got a hold of him. And he comes out and he grabs Tom and throws him out on the sidewalk. I mean, literally on the sidewalk. Curses him out, calls him some racial names, and says, "You'll not vote in here today." And just turns around and walks back in the polling place. Well, Tom was not to be denied. He got up, dusted himself off, got back in line, and in the crowd coming in the polling place there, precinct number 11, he comes in, and as I have read and have been told by some of the witnesses who were there, that he came in and just kind of stood in line with everybody and kind of leaned up against the wall. And as the crowd was moving around, it kind of parts, and Wendy's across the room and sees Tom. In a fit of rage, Wendy draws his .45 pistol and fires. First, they didn't know if Tom was hit, but he struck, and he kind of started sliding down the wall, and people ran to assist Tom. They separated Wendy, made Wendy put his gun up. They call an ambulance, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but ambulances back then were ran by the funeral homes. Yeah, think of the level of care that they were given back then. So, an ambulance comes, and they pick Tom up, and they get him out of the hospital. The GI poll watchers see all this go down, and they start to try to leave. They go and say, hey, they go to the deputies and say, hey, we're leaving, because in their minds, and these guys were Ed Vessel and Shy Scott, these two veterans, these two poll watchers. They go over to, I think Dennis Wilbur was there, and definitely Wendy Wise. And they go over to the deputies and say, hey, we're out of here, because to them, they thought, if they'll shoot good old Tom Gillespie, they'll shoot anybody. And so they were trying to leave, and supposedly Wendy said, you're not leaving, because as long as you're here, we can say that we had a fair election. You kind of get the idea of what he was implying there. So, here's what happens next. You'll have to look very closely, and I'll have to point some things out in this video. So, Scott and Vestal decide they're getting out of there one way or the other. So after Wendy's taken to the hospital, Tom is taken to the hospital, rumors started to fly that maybe he'd been killed, and emotions were high. They're trying to leave, and finally they just decide one way or another they're leaving. Now I've heard it two ways: that they broke through the glass in the door and went out the door. I've also heard that they just kind of walked over to the plate glass windows at precinct number 11 up there and pushed against them until they broke and rolled out on the sidewalk. But at the moment that this all happens, Chuck Redford is across the street. If you remember Chuck, he was our longtime county trustee. He was a veteran, recently moved to McMinn County, and he was a DJ at the brand new radio station that's right across the street when all this stuff's going down. And he sees all this commotion going on, Wendy being put in the hospital, in the ambulance, and then he sees all this other stuff. So he grabs his camera and takes this picture at this very critical moment when all this happens. So what you're seeing, first of all, you see the guy right here with his hands up? All right, there's another one. You can barely see him between the two cars. He's right here, and his hands are up. That's Scott and Vestal walking away. And the witnesses said they were walking away saying, we're unarmed, we're unarmed, we're unarmed. And good old Wendy Wise, he's right there in front of the door. And he's standing there like this with his pistol. Because he's threatening to shoot anybody else. And he says that to the crowd. I'll shoot any other SOB that tries to mess with this election. I mean, this guy's making friends left and right. So you see Vestal and Scott in front of all of these people walking away, trying to get away. Luckily, he did not shoot either one of them. This is also witnessed about 2 or 3 doors down, just up there on the corner of White Street. This building is still there too. The Daily Post-Athenian office was right there. And they're out there, the editor's out there, and he's got his board out, getting ready to put the totals down like they would do. So literally, that's what we know all this stuff. There's a photograph of it, there's all these witnesses, and literally the newspaper watched it happen right in front of them, so that we've got all this recorded. So this event, the shooting of Tom Gillespie, and then the 2 poll watchers escaping with some gunplay going on here at precinct number 11, causes concern, of course, to Sheriff Mansfield. And he gives the order that he wants all ballot boxes collected. Now the election's not even over with, but we're going to collect all the ballot boxes and count them securely at the jail. Now that smells a little bad. I think it smells a lot bad. He didn't really have the authority to do that, but that's what he does. So I've read about these and heard eyewitnesses tell me years ago that I would walk around and talk to them, how these big sedans pulled up, and they're loading up ballot boxes and taking them over to the jail. And let me back up in just a minute and come back over here to the Carnegie Library, because that was attempted at the Carnegie Library. But there was a huge all-night standoff because the people in the Carnegie Library would not turn their ballot boxes over. And there was a standoff. Luckily, there was no gunshots, nobody fired around as far as I've ever read. But all night long, there was a bit of a standoff between the GIs and the deputies that had came over here to get the ballot boxes. And so every ballot box in the county wasn't taken to the jail. I want to make that clear. And you'll see a picture in a minute. A lot of them were, but not every one of them were. They were either hidden or they just didn't make it out to get them. And so they just never got those ballot boxes. But again, an issue happened right here, just a few blocks away. While all this is going on. Let me back up real quick. I just forgot. There's a couple of funny stories that go along with this, which I just love, because it's in light of this very serious issue that's going on. Some really strange things happen. So the Kennedy brothers were some of the leaders in the GI party. Otto Kennedy was a longtime member of our Republican Party here. He passed away in the early 90s. So Otto and his 2 brothers, Bull and JP, I think. What was it, JP? I think JP was the third brother. So they were actually from Monroe County. Their father, coincidentally, was a game warden that was killed mysteriously in Madisonville years before. So they kind of came down here and got involved in McMinn County, lived down here, got involved in law enforcement. They would be longtime members of the law enforcement community. But they were part of the leaders of the GI party. Otto owned a tire store. If you remember Bob McKee, that was our state representative for many, many years, he owned McKee Tire over in Athens. He bought that from Otto. Otto started what was then called the S&K Tire Shop, and it wasn't where Bob had it out there on West Madison. It was downtown, about where the Hines building is on Washington Avenue, on the roads behind the courthouse, the street behind the courthouse. That's also where the GI headquarters was. So that whole block, that was kind of the GI ground zero. You had if you were walking down Madison away from the courthouse, the GI headquarters would be on your left, and then Otto's tire shop was down here on the right. So that's where all these guys are hanging out while this is going on. So Otto and his brothers are hanging out at the tire shop, and these guys are pretty tough. They're old Monroe County boys. And like I said, these old deputies are coming in, and they're letting old Otto know who's in charge. They're walking down, showing their big guns off. Well, this goes on all day. And Otto's brother Bull was a Golden Gloves boxer. And Bull was not to be trifled with. And so they finally got tired of seeing these deputies showing off. And so they got a little plan together. So the next time 2 or 3 of those deputies walked by, kind of mean mugging them and showing their guns off, Otto and Bull and them said, "Hey, come on over here, let's talk a minute." Well, them old deputies, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They got their gun on, they're working for the sheriff, so they stroll in the tire shop. What they don't realize is there's about 10 other guys in there that beat them up, take their guns away from them, strip them down naked, and drive them out in the county and kick them out of the car. So, as the day's rocking on, their buddies would be like, "Where's those so-and-so and so-and-so?" "I don't know." And we're heading down toward Otto's tire shop. "Well, let's just go down there and see what's going on." So they walk down. "Hey, you seen so-and-so?" "Yeah, come on in, they're right back here in the back." So a few more walk in. Same thing, get beat up, get disarmed, get stripped naked, drove out the county, kicked out. After a little while, word got back to Sheriff Mansfield. He realized he was losing deputies. Where did he need to replace them? He finally had to send the order, "Hey, stay away from Otto's tire shop." So that's just, I thought I'd throw that in there. I always thought that was just kind of humorous. So anyway, getting back to the timeline, Mansfield collects all the ballots, all the ballot boxes that he could, and takes them to the jail. This building, of course, is gone. It sits about where the parking lot is, or he said about where the parking lot is today of Carter Insurance on White Street. So, some of my information I'm telling you I've gotten from a lot of it from Dr. Steve Byram's book. And I would highly recommend that. I think that is the best account, most scholarly study of all of these events. When I got interested in this stuff, and I also want you to know, I'm not up here telling you stuff I think. A lot of the men that were present were still living. And I would go and walk the streets with them and let them tell me what they saw and what they experienced. And so all of those personal recollections I'm sharing with you too. Paul and I have been friends for years and years, and we've shared information between things that we both kind of came from, things that his family have shared with me, or process to put the story together. As night falls, there's this polarization, so to speak, of the two sides. You've got all these deputies that have showed up back at the jail with the sheriff, and Mr. Cantrell's there too, initially. Well, he's there, and Mansfield is there initially at the jail. They're all there, the deputies are there, the ballot boxes are there. There's a reporter in there, I think with the Chattanooga Times, so they're all in the jail. The GIs, I've heard it told this way: when the deputies were loading up the ballot boxes, the that the GIs have decided, we gotta do something. This is when they go, put the word out, we need guns. And people start bringing guns into town and making sure these GIs are going home and getting whatever rifles or squirrel guns that they've got. They're bringing them back. This is when a group of GIs, there's no doubt that this happened, go to the old National Guard Armory over by the old McMinn County football field. And there are two different stories about whether they forced their way in or they were led in. I personally think they were led in. And they collected a bunch of military rifles, took them downtown, and I can't say it for 100% this is true, but I've heard it said, that as the deputies were carrying ballot boxes out of precinct number 11, within a stone's throw down at the corner of the courthouse, GIs were handing out rifles to their supporters. So I always tell people, in McMinn County, we like to keep our arguments really, really close. And so both sides have kind of backed up into their positions. The deputies are all in the jail. The sheriff's in the jail. Mr. Cantrell's in the jail. The GIs take a position on the hillside across the street, where the old post office, which is still up there today, TWU owns the building now. They took positions up on that high ground. The old fire station that's still there, it wasn't there then. That was a funeral home or grave marker business, a monument business. They got down behind those monuments, and then they got up into Knight Park. And what they did was leave the back of the jail open. And I'll always say that this kind of shows you, this is the humanity kind of coming up here. They were afraid there was going to be a shootout. I mean, everybody's got a gun. So, hey, chances are. But they left the back of the jail unguarded, intentionally. Because what the GI leadership told all the other GIs was, we don't want to hurt anybody, we just want the ballot boxes. If people leave the jail, let them go. As long as they're not carrying a ballot box, let them go. And throughout the night, men in the darkness would be seen running out the back of the jail. There was a coal pile back there piled up on a fence. And they climb up that coal pile and jump over the fence, disappear in the darkness. But nobody ever saw them trying to take a ballot box out, so nobody bothered them. So, the GIs are all spread out. It's darkness is falling. The deputies are in the jail. Now, this is August, and back then in Athens, there were a lot of trees. And Athens was actually known for its trees at one point on its city streets. In front of the jail were two big trees, and they were fully leafed out. This is 1st of August. So when all this goes down, that probably saved a lot of people's lives, because you really, when you're up there in the parking lot of the old post office, you probably couldn't see the porch of the jail. You could just see the top of it because there's two trees. So when they were shooting, and all this happens, they're just kind of shooting at the jail. They really couldn't aim at anything. That probably kept some people from getting killed. So the GIs do this. Here's another little dose of humanity. They decide, hey, just in case shooting breaks out, there's all these cars parked in front of the jail. You'll see that in a minute. We want to make sure nobody's sitting in those cars if we do have to fire our weapons. So they send 3 young GIs. One of them is, if you remember, Prof. Powers was one of them. They volunteer to go down Hornsby Street, cross over White, look in the cars in the darkness, and then come back and report whether there's people there. So they do that. They sneak over there in front of the jail and peek in the cars, going in the cars, and they're coming back across White Street. And evidently, one of the deputies in the jail sees these 3 men sneaking around the cars, and then he sees them coming across the street again, and doesn't realize that the entire other side of the street is covered in armed GIs. Puts a shotgun out the window and fires. Well, those pellets actually hit Prof in the neck and hit one of his friends that was with him. And when that gunshot rang out, that's when the Battle of Athens took place. That's when the actual gunfight took place. For about 45 minutes or so, everybody in the jail shooting across the street, everybody on the hillside shooting across the street. There was a transformer on the corner of Hornsby and White that fed the jail. They shoot it out. They basically shoot the power out of the jail. So for about, it was not an all-night constant gunfire. just about 45 minutes, and then they started to realize, especially the guys in the jail, hey, we're trapped in this building, we cannot go get more ammunition. And so it's, from the witnesses that I talked to, they kind of stopped shooting first, which caused the GIs on the hillside to kind of hold back on some of their shooting. And then it turned in throughout the night to periodic little shots and little bursts of gunfire, but it was mostly threats being hollered back and forth across the street. Hey, give us the ballot boxes and we'll let you go. Well, you're all going to prison when the governor gets here. Because Mr. Cantrell and Mansfield had reached out to Governor Jim McCord, who's a Democrat, same political party, friends. And there was some discussion about sending the National Guard to Athens, to McMinn County, to reestablish order. I have read and I've been told that McCord actually considered that. But as he is talking to his staff, a wise staff member said, Governor, we can send the National Guard to Athens if you want to, but you have to ask yourself this, when they get there, what side of the street are they going to get on? And he kind of understood the situation that he'd be sending those men into, so he backed off very wisely, and we're thankful that he did. And so the National Guard didn't come, but that was the threat. You know, hey, you're all, and look, guys, they're shooting at the doggone jail. That's a crime. It's still a crime. Trust me. It's still a crime. Don't get any ideas. You know, and so that will play out as we tell the story, because both sides, there were some issues on both sides. And like Paul and me like to say, this is not a Greek tragedy where you've got this bad guy and this good guy. It don't work that way. And really, to me, I think it makes the story even more interesting. Because you kind of had everybody on each side was doing kind of what they thought was right, and neither one of the other thought the other one was right. And so we get into this gunfight, and these people that we know each other, go to church together, and so on, so they're related to. That's why this all goes down. So I will tell you this, though, another little sweet story. When Prof, after he's wounded, he goes back up on White Street, and he's being attended to. And the little girl that attends him and pulls the pellets out of his neck was Ozell, who he winds up marrying. And so that was the night they kind of supposedly got together. And I'm very blessed to have Prof as one of the men that I was able to walk those streets with, and him relay that story to me before he passed away. So it kind of goes, like I say, throughout the night. The threats are coming back and forth. Periodic bursts of gunfire all night long. Another thing that I love to tell this part. Well, let me get to. So these are some highway patrolmen that are. This is an actual photograph from that night. Throughout the night, other law enforcement agencies disappeared. The highway patrol vanished. Before the night is over with, before the next 48 hours is over with, every city council in McMinn County is going to resign. Every school board in McMinn County is going to resign. I mean, this thing disrupted every aspect of life in McMinn County. Every social, every educational, every government agency basically was out. There was no leadership when this thing is over with. But this, I always like to show that. Those guys were there early, but they kind of disappeared. So the state was no help to us either. But here's a funny little tidbit I'll share with you. So I'm always amused when you study these things, because we like to, Paul and I talk about this all the time. People kind of co-opt this story. If you're a Second Amendment person, you see the value of the Second, the Second Amendment certainly played a role in this, but it's so much more than that. Voting was an issue in this, but it's so much more than that. So when you study these things, you kind of have to put yourself in the mindset of people living in 1946. Their values were different back then. Like it or not, their values were different. Specifically women. So you had these women who were not participants in the battle itself, because back then their place was at home. And they're at home, and they hear all this stuff going down. And they hear about all these gunshots, and their husbands and their sons and their nephews and their dads are out there, and they're out there all night long they might get hungry. So the women did show up. And numerous participants in this, as I walked the streets with them, told me this story that to this day is unbelievable. A bunch of the women would show up with cookies and sandwiches and lemonade, because that's just the way it was. You took care of that's what women did. And they're up there, and the way that Prof explained it to me, he said, "You be shooting at the courthouse or at the jail, and think, well, I'm gonna go have a cookie." And you walk back on Hot Street, and they're basically having a picnic back there. And you hang out with your girlfriend for a minute, eat your sandwich, drink some lemonade, and go, well, I'm gonna go back to the jail some more. And that's just hard for me to fathom, but that's the human side of things like this. That people it's almost like they got bored with the whole thing going on and started thinking about filling their bellies. And to me, that's just there's a little human side of this that always kind of intrigues me. So, about 5 a.m., 5:30, just before sunrise, some guys from McMinn County show up. I think they came over in a Jeep. They're GIs. They come to the GIs there on the hillside and say, "Hey, you've heard what's going on? We can get those guys out of the jail." Because these guys were former demolitions experts. And there was at the time a rock quarry being operated in Bates County with inmates, by the way, from Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. And those GIs happened to know where the dynamite was stored at the rock quarry. And guess what they brought to Athens with? So they say, "Hey, we can get those guys out of jail for you." So they set a charge. They drive down White Street, and they throw a charge over into the yard of the jail. It blows up. Kind of out in front of the jail, doesn't really do any damage. They go around the courthouse, set another charge, come back up the street, throw it over in the yard. This time it rolls up closer to the jail porch, blows up, and does cause some damage, and that's when the white flags came. Hey, we don't want to die. We don't want to die. But remember, a lot of these guys were not from here. They didn't want to get blown up for a sheriff they didn't really work for. So that's probably a part of this. Also, Mansfield was gone. He had snuck out of the jail that night. And this again shows you the difference in him and Mr. Cantrell, because Mr. Cantrell's still there. And he'll be there through everything I'm about to tell you. But Mansfield was gone. He'd snuck out, jumped over the coal pile. He's back in Georgia next morning. So they decide, the GIs or the deputies come out. I think I have a picture of them surrendering. And you see, they didn't wear uniforms or anything. That's kind of things. We're regular clothes. They're coming out. They surrender. Now, I know I told you some kind of entertaining things and funny things, but this is a moment right here when things could have really taken a bad turn. Because what you had was, you had an office all night, partly shootout, partly standoff. You've got these people coming into town that already are angry with the sheriff and his deputies because of some of the things they've experienced. And suddenly, everybody's face to face. And the tables have turned, and the deputies don't have guns on anymore. So, some of the citizens grab some of these guys, they beat up a few of them. One of them got his throat cut. Luckily, it was not a fatal wound. There is a story that Mr. Cantrell, as he is walking out of the jail, that one of the GIs, not even recognizing who he was, or not the GIs, one of the deputies, not recognizing who Mr. Cantrell was, pointed a firearm at the back of his head and pulled the trigger. And I just say it like this, and if you can't already see this, if you cannot see God's hand in some of this, I don't know any way to explain it. But the guy's gun either misfired or he had already, it was empty, and it was clipped. And Mr. Cantrell walked unmolested away, and there's a whole other story there about him getting out of town. But they beat up several of them. Some of the citizens, in their angst and anger and frustration, actually said, "Let's hang them." So it really could have gotten bad. But you know, again, sometimes the Lord just puts people at the right place at the right time. And there was an attorney named Ralph Dugan, who was, I think, from Etowah. And Ralph was a pacifist. He was part of the GI party. He had kind of preached throughout the year, hey, listen, we've got to do this peacefully. He was always, that was his thing. We've got to do this peacefully. He'd always try to calm everybody down. And as this moment comes when people are literally almost ready to murder each other, they've turned cars over, set fire to cars there in front of them. I mean, it looks like a war zone. Ralph climbs up on one of those cars, an overturned car, and gives this impassioned speech to the crowd. And says, and I'm summarizing, if the governor shows up, we have control of our county. And we'll show him that we have control of our county. And basically, we don't want to mess this up. We're McMinn County. And calms everybody down. The citizens locked the deputies back up in the jail and retrieved the ballot boxes. I think I have a picture of that. They get the ballot boxes out of the jail. The sun is coming up, and I'll let you go through some. There's some of the deputies. Now this is when the day dawns, and you see the crowd surrounding the old jail there. There's some of the cars on White Street overturned. Windows broken out. Some of them, like I say, have been burned. That's the picture on the right. If you were standing on White Street today, looking back toward where the old jail that most of us remember was built after this, looking down Hornsby Street, that's a view down Hornsby Street. The old city jail actually still stands. That's that white building right there. That's behind the old jail that was built after this one. So you kind of see, everybody came into town to see what was going on. There's the ballots that they collected. That's an inside picture of the jail. You see some of the bullet holes in the wall, the shot. I don't know how many of y'all remember those old refrigerators, but if you could shoot through one of those, that's a pretty bad gunfire. It's a miracle that nobody was killed. So here's the thing. Like I told you, all of our school boards, city commission in Etowah, all resigned. City commission in Athens, all resigned. There's nobody in charge. So this is what citizens did. And I will always forever be impressed. This is my favorite part of the story. What you see there is a very rare photograph of the inside of the old courthouse. And that's the upstairs, the big courtroom. Citizens got together and worked this out to try to fit this. This is the night of it. Trying to figure out what are we going to do. The county has to continue to operate. We've got uncounted ballots. What do we do? So what they decided to do is appoint these three men to govern the county until the ballots can be counted. This is who these men were. So, Bilbo Cartwright was a politician. C.A. Anderson was a business owner, and Bernie Hampton is a minister. I think that was very wise of them to pick three men from three different backgrounds. And if you think about it, all of them probably were able to contribute something just to manage the county for a couple of days until the ballots could be counted. And they did. And they just kind of pulled people in off the street and said, go direct traffic, or you go be a deputy, you go be a police officer for a day or two. And they ran the county. I like to say it like this: for about 3 days, we existed almost completely independent of state and federal government while we're counting those ballots. So people realize, well, we don't have a sheriff. That's pretty important. So they go ahead and appoint, Knox Henry, goodness gracious. Knox Henry is sheriff. Go ahead and fill that position, because there was no question the sheriff was gone. So they go ahead and appoint Knox. Then they get together and there's rules, folks. There are ways to do things right. And I will, again, be forever impressed that they fall back and said, okay, we're going to validate this election, but we're going to do it the right way. And so they call their election commission together. This guy right here was Georgia Woods. He's who Woods Hospital is named after. Georgia Woods was the Speaker of the House, the State House in Nashville, from Etowah, from McMinn County. George was a Democrat. He had left when all this happens. This is about 3 days later, and but he's part of the election commission. He's got to be there to validate the election. So they can't find him. And, you know, you can't blame the guy for wanting to get out of town and not really knowing if it was safe to come back. I have another photograph of him. I don't think it's in this slideshow. They finally find him and talk him into coming to the courthouse and sitting down with there's Otto sitting beside him, Otto Kennedy. That's Bull back there. I think that's JP sitting on the back wall. I forget who these other guys are. I think that might be Cartwright or the other guys. So they talk George Woods into coming back. I've got this funny picture somebody took of him as he's coming in the courthouse door, and his eyes are about this big. He's going, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. But they welcome him in. Of course, they sit down and they go through the ballots as they're supposed to by law. And of course, the GIs win. You know, you can look at that however how you want to, but nevertheless, that's what the votes said as far as the ones they were able to put back together. So they declared all of the GI candidates, and there they are, as Otto was shaking Knox Henry's hand. There's all the candidates. They were in office at that point. And they began to, again, the county began to put itself back together, so to speak. So a few days later, a newspaper reporter tracks down former Sheriff Mansfield down in Georgia. And this is a kind of an entertaining article because he's like, oh, there's no hard feelings, you know. And I love this picture because look at his mama. Look at him, you know, your boy never does wrong. She's got him all hugged up there. This is his sister. Is that right, or daughter? Which one? His sister?
I think, I could be his daughter.
Maybe his daughter.
She went to McMinn County High School.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful lady. Looks like a movie star. And she's who came back years later, right?
50 years later.
50 years
come
later.
back to Athens.
Yes.
50 years after.
And I'm going to tell you something, how quickly things began to move in a positive direction. A few days after the election was validated, Mansfield calls Otto Kennedy and says, Otto, I've still got a house up on Forest Avenue, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I got a house on Forest Avenue. I need to come up there and get my stuff out of my house. I've got money in the bank. I've got this and that. Otto says, come on up. And they meet. And they escort him. And from what we've all read, what we know that the people, it was actually an amicable little day that they spent together. As they drove him around and helped him settle up his affairs, shook hands, and he goes back to Georgia, never returned. Like Paul says, the daughter did eventually come back and settle up some later business about 50 years later when she was an elderly lady. But he actually stayed in Cartersville and is buried down there today. And like I say, this is kind of my favorite parts of this. A rumor got spread because First Biggs was the sheriff of Polk County. He, and of course he's a Democrat, he's friends with Democrats here. A rumor started circulating that First Biggs was going to march up here with a bunch of people from Polk County and retake McMinn County and give it back to Mr. Cantrell and Mr. Mansfield, Sheriff Mansfield. I've told Steve Ross, Sheriff of Polk County, I'm not forgot that sheriff. If I see a bunch of Polk County deputies coming this way. Of course, it never happened. But people believed it to the point that Mr. Instinct or the DPA got in an airplane and flew down Highway 411 just to make sure that there wasn't a bunch of people coming up from Polk County to retake McMinn County. But, you know, that's what happens when these events go on. There's all this paranoia, and most of it's for nothing. Again, the city aldermen, councils resign, school boards resign. Eleanor Roosevelt got wind of all this, writes this op-ed that goes nationally, and basically says this is what happens when government doesn't listen to its citizens. And that quote is over on our mural in Athens. So her paying attention to it too gave it even more validity in all of the papers nationwide. This was something again that got attention all over the country. So again, this is my favorite part, the aftermath, because it's refreshing at times to see. I think, and Paul and I talk about this a lot, I think this is the interesting part.
Yes.
It's easy to be interested over some bullets flying. But when you really put it back together to the point that you have a legacy and you fix something that's broken, to me it's just amazing. So what they did, folks got together, realizing that we have an antiquated constitution, realizing that the county court system really didn't work for us like it used to, realizing that the office of sheriff had way too much power. And they began to address these issues, and they formed a good government league. And those formed in different places in Tennessee, but it formed here. And they sat down together and addressed these issues. Another thing that made that easier was not long after the battle happened. Mr. Cantrell had gone to Nashville that morning, or that day. His family, his wife and daughters had gone to Murphy.
Yes.
Correct? Had gone over to Murphy because they didn't know. They didn't know really if it was safe. He's over there about 2 weeks. He's at the Hermitage Hotel. Is that
Yes.
correct? He gets, I'm remembering this stuff.
Yes.
He gets a phone call, and they say, Mr. Cantrell, you need to come back home. You're a member of our community. You and your family need to come back home. He comes back home. He lives here in Etowah the rest of his life. He never carries a gun. He never has any issues. He's a productive member, part of our city, and has a great life. Passed away in 1962.
Yes.
Buried out at Green Hill. So when he does come back, though, not long after he comes back, of all people to reach out to him, Otto Kennedy does. Or they reached out to each other. Because they, even though they had been on opposite sides of this big event, basically shooting at each other, they shared a common hobby in business, if you will. Both of them had prize bird dogs and bred, enjoyed breeding and training prize bird dogs. They got together and had a little bird dog breeding business. and it was fun. But think what that did. When people see these two guys coming back together and having a relationship, what that would do for everybody else. I mean, that type of thing with two leaders coming together from an opposite side of this event that really could have torn the county apart. Coming back together like that set a really great example of coming back together. And so that kind of helped with the idea of the Good Government League to work through these issues. So, what the Good Government League did is come up with a completely new and unique form of county government that we enjoy today. It had never been done anywhere else as far as we know. The county commission and county mayor form of government was born here. Most people don't realize that. We get too caught up in the bullets. But this is the home, this is the birthplace of that form of government. They came up, they initially started as a county council and a hired county manager. And then it eventually evolved into an elected county executive that we call the county mayor today. And then the county council becomes the county commission later on. And they set this up. It goes to court the following year and is found to be a constitutional form of local government. And it begins to spread throughout Tennessee and throughout the South. For a while, it coexisted with county court. People they were kind of shy about letting county court go, but basically county court's administrative powers went away. And it just kind of turned into just almost a hollow institution. It kind of lingered on for a few years and then ultimately is done away with the rewrite of the Tennessee Constitution. But this is what we enjoy today. This is why we have a county commission and a county mayor form of government in basically all of our counties in Tennessee and throughout much of the South.
700 and more counties have this
Yes.
form of government.
So, again, that's to me, that's the legacy of this thing. Only one person goes to prison. That's wise. Even though a bunch of guys shot in the jail, even though a bunch of guys may or may not have manipulated some elections, one guy goes to jail. He probably could have been a more deserving guy. He winds up going to prison for shooting Tom Gillespie, and winds up getting cancer and dying in prison. But that's Wendy, not the best guy in the world. Tom Gillespie, I forgot to tell you this part. He's taken to the hospital that night, and another thing that fired everybody up was the rumors that got spread that Tom had been killed. It even got told that he was putting the ballot in the ballot box when he shot him in the back. And that really fired people up because people genuinely loved Tom. Everybody loved him. He lives into the 1980s. And a lot of what I'm telling you comes from an interview that he did with the Daily Post-Athenian as an old man, recounting all of that day and what happened to him at precinct number 11. But Wendy is the only one that goes to prison. We don't talk about this for about 60 years. We don't discuss it. Here's why. Not long after this event, you had people coming in to Athens and McMinn County, wanting to write articles, and some were written, some national publications. There was supposedly a movie crew came, and people started trying to make bad guys out of these guys and good guys out of these guys. And this is something else that always impressed me. Our citizens that have been involved in this said, we don't want any part of that. But it's almost like we respected each other. Almost like, I say it like this, it's like a family fight. That you're gonna have a knockdown drag out in your living room, but you don't go talk about that to anybody else because that's family. You don't share that with anybody else. You don't let anybody else talk about it because that's your business. And that's kind of the way that we responded to this. Again, there were relationships before this event. We had this really crazy, terrible event, but the relationships come back together. And nobody really wanted to openly blame each other. Now, down through the years, blame's been placed here and there. Mr. Cantor gets a lot of blame laid on him, just because he was most well-known person on that side. But when you really look at the situation, he didn't deserve it. And people just sort of, they worked through that and came, we were very resilient, I guess is the word used, to work through that issue. And we wouldn't talk about it. There were no historical signs. There was nothing. Luckily, in the 2000s, a lot of these people that had been involved, that's when they started to pass away. That's when that generation started, which kind of lost that greatest generation. Started losing them in the 2000s. And I think that helped people decide that they were involved involved in it and knew things about it to come forward. Mr. Byram had wrote, Steve had written the book in, what year, 85?
Yeah, I think so.
So the book had been written, it sort of opened people up to talk about it a little bit more. And so it took about 20 more years. But we started to open up some dialogue, get these folks to talk a little bit more, be more comfortable talking about it, because everybody was really protective of their family members and their own reputations. Not everybody was proud of how it had gone down. It's almost like they've been there, done that, we just need to leave it alone. But as time had gone on, people began to realize this is something important. And some of us try to approach it as historians and not as people trying to make heroes and villains out of people. And just tell the story as it is, which is a fantastic story. And so we got the historical sign put up in 2006. It's there on White Street. And now we've got some tours that people can take, and we have these programs. This would have never happened 25 years ago. We were not at that point to sit down and have an honest discussion about this event, because there was just too many emotions involved in it, and we just weren't ready to talk about it. But it really is something that is very important. Again, probably the most significant historical event that ever happened, with long-standing effects on local government. Even my office, like I said at the beginning, I'm a fee office, but I don't collect any fees because of this. It changed the way the sheriffs operate, it changed the way the local governments operate. So many things across the board are better because of this difficult situation. 2 years later, a similar situation happens in Polk County, and people die. And the National Guard did get called in. You've probably seen the pictures if you attended Tyler's presentation of literally sandbags piled up around the courthouse in Polk County with machine guns and soldiers dug in. I mean, it was that bad in a neighboring county 2 years later. We didn't go through it like that. So I think it's a testament to our citizens. It's a testament to all the people that are involved to be able to get through that and deal with it in a very mature way and preserve peace and dignity of each other. But just a fantastic story. So that's really the presentation. Does anybody have any questions? This is the part that makes me nervous. Any questions that I may or may not be able to answer? Yes, sir.
One thing that caught my eye when you talked about not having debt or having a balanced budget, whichever way it was, but with the way things were structured, with all these quote-unquote fees going on, could there actually have been surpluses? You know, could things have actually maybe been even better if this wealth wasn't being not necessarily hoarded, but maybe ill-gotten gain?
Again, it just really depends on who was in charge. I think there were surpluses. I mean, the county was in great financial shape under some of this leadership. Mr. Cantrell was one of those people, the auditing that was done when he was in office really showed some really good management of the sheriff's office. So it really just depended on the men who were in office. If they chose to, like some others did, abuse some of that power, it could easily be done. But if you had some ethics about you, you could actually do some good because you have the power to do that good. So it really just depended on who was there. Anybody else? Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. We had a great crowd.
You got your same overall, so you can't flex that.